For decades now, all over the internet and social media, you find the phrase New World Order. It has become synonymous with a secretive power elite that has a globalist agenda to rule the world through an authoritarian world government. Its origin as a conspiracy theory has its roots in the Second Red Scare during the late 1940s and early 1950s, when both secular and Christian right American agitators embraced and spread dubious fears of Freemasons, Illuminati, and Jews as the alleged driving forces behind an international communist conspiracy. Eventually, this morphed and distorted into the various versions we find today. To be clear, the archive does not subscribe to this tenuous line of reasoning because knowing the history of such concepts helps us to discern the utterly illogical nature of certain premises. What we are focused on is the very first, real world order, one that is well over 7,000 years old and does not have the word new in front of it. The composition known as Enki and the World Order has been referred to as one of the most complex of Sumerian narratives. Enki, the Sumerian god of the sweet fertilizing waters of the deep, of crafts, magic, and wisdom, is the son of Anu and Nammu, and one of the most important Mesopotamian gods. In-depth analysis of Enki and the World Order are few and far between. The first translation of the myth was by Samuel Kramer in 1961 in his book titled Sumerian Mythology. Then, in 1969, C.A. Benito translated Enki and the World Order together with Enki and Nammu. It is the intention of this presentation to cover aspects which we believe deserve a closer investigation in the light of our understanding of Mesopotamian history, religion, and recent sources, especially involving the question of goddesses and their civilizing role in the function of intelligence for the effective exercise of power, and Enki's response to Inanna's demand for more power for herself in the narrative. Basically, the composition is a Sumerian text preserved on Old Babylonian tablets, and many of its traits take us back to the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, because not only Enki's temple in Eridu is in full activity, and let's not forget that Eridu, or Enki City, is a very old settlement where kingship descended to earth from the heavens, but also shows that trade was becoming intense with the countries of the Persian Gulf, with as the capital and the most important trading center. Moreover, the region of Martu is an ally and not an enemy, as shown in the annals of the 3rd dynasty of Meluha, a city located at the Indian Peninsula, is mentioned as well, showing that the strength of Sumer was great and that she had allies in all civilized quarters of the known world. Historically, therefore, the composition may have been inscribed at the time of the 3rd dynasty of a time of triumph for ancient Mesopotamia in all levels of human endeavor. The first written documents begin to yield some coherent sense circa 3200 BCE. By this time, Mesopotamia had been inhabited for well over 2,000 years according to mainstream academia, but alternative hypotheses put its inhabitation tens of thousands of years earlier. At any rate, the rich history of the region must have been part of an oral tradition which may have well started with the sages of Eridu, thus predating 3200 BCE by at least 2,000 years. It seems therefore logical to suppose that Enki and the World Order has its origins in the earliest times of the Ubaid I or Eridu phase, where the power was centered upon Eridu as part of an oral tradition. Writing is only created around 3500 BCE in the Uruk period, which succeeds the Eridu era. Thus, Enki and the World Order was probably reworked and inscribed as we know it now at the time of the 3rd dynasty of The first part consists of a hymnal address to Enki, extolling his beneficence for the earth in general and for the civilized earth clearly identified as Sumer. Enki is described as the Lord who walks nobly on heaven and earth, self-reliant. Beloved by Anu the Sky Father, prized by Enlil, Lord Air, the leading god of the younger generation of Mesopotamian deities and Enki's older brother. Enki's home, set up in Eridu, is a noble house described as the mast of heaven and earth, a place of stability and beauty. He is the power of fertility that comes from the sweet underground waters, and it was him who taught how food should be properly served at the table of the gods and the people, a clear allusion to the Apkallu, the sages of Enki and Eridu who taught humanity the arts of civilization, including mathematics, referred to in the myth as computing the numbers of the stars. More importantly, it is clearly stated that Enki deserves the great trust of Enlil to bring joy to the rulers of the land. For example, Enki receives full approval of Enlil to organize the world for the common good of rulers, explained in the narrative. Lords and rulers, to thrill their hearts, to bring them joy, Enlil, the great Kur, has empowered you. And that Enki has also given the people a place to live. You have looked after them. You have made sure they follow their shepherd. You kept the people safe in their homes. This shows without a doubt that Enki's actions are also put into practice for the common good of the land and humanity as a whole. Enki then proceeds to praise his actions. Tell us that Enlil, the leading deity of Sumer, has gathered all the Mi, the measures of earthly and heavenly power, and placed them in Enki's hands, and that once in possession of the heavenly and earthly powers, Enki passed them on from his home in Eridu to humanity mostly as arts and crafts. The actual words of the narrative are the following. My great brother, ruler of all the lands, gathered all the Mi together, placed the Mi in my hands. From the Eker, house of Enlil, I passed on the arts and crafts to my Abzu, Eridu. However, although Enki is told by Enlil that he should organize the world for the greatest good of the rulers and inhabitants of the land, Enki does not merely do what he is told, but acts in full control of his abilities, for, number one, he was given the sacred measures of heavenly and earthly powers to do so, and number two, Enlil's request was a general one, meaning that Enki had space to act independently and delegate powers as far as he worked for the good of rulers and inhabitants of Sumer. In other words, Enki's main role in the organization of the world is firmly based on the application of intelligence for the optimal use of resources available, which are then entrusted to the gods and goddesses of the land. These lines show a great mystery which underlines the success of Sumerian civilization. Enki is shown as the great ally of Enlil. For example, Enki's intelligence and optimal use of force to achieve the best results is acknowledged by Enlil, the leading deity of Sumer. Fundamentally, the bond between Enki and Enlil is profound because Enlil stands for the outer manifestation of power, the impetus to establish a common vision based on the leadership, whereas Enki is the inner manifestation of power, the one who knows, gives meaning, and finds solutions to all impossibilities based on sheer, practical, or mystical insight. This is the reason why Almighty Enlil gives all the sacred measures to Enki, and always has to concede surrender to Enki's insights and deeds, even when these deeds go frontally against Enlil's first intentions. However, there is no sense of Enlil being the loser, humiliated or degraded by Enki. The impression we get is of balance, common sense, and hope. In terms of form, clearly the first part of the narrative shows a liturgical character and may well have been recited in rites and chanted in ceremonies of the cult of Enki. The last lines of the first part stress the fact that Enki is praised by all the gods of Sumer as one of the great gods of the land. the great prince, who had been drawn near to his land, the Anuna gods speak with affection. Lord, who rides the great me, the pure me, who stands watch over the great me, the myriad me, who is foremost everywhere above and below at Eridu, the pure place, the most precious place, where the noble me had been taken in. O Enki, Lord above and below, praise. In the second part of the narrative, Enki goes on a journey by barge, visiting several cities and locations. A recurrent pattern in Sumerian mythology consists of the journeys of the gods by barge, especially to Nippur, the religious capital of Mesopotamia. We have accounts of the journeys of Nanna and Ninurta to Nippur, as well as Enki's journey both to Eridu, where he builds his temple, and to Nippur to visit and praise Enlil. Even the New Year's festival, both at Ur and Babylon, included a triumphant arrival of the city god or goddess by barge and a procession as part of the festivities' scheduled events. Enki's journey in this narrative has a triumphant character, for he first blesses the whole land of Sumer. Sumer, great Kur, Mata of what is above and below, robed in enduring light, settling the me upon the people. From sunrise to sunset, your me are lofty me, untouchable. Your heart is a maze, inscrutable. Your life-giving womb, the place where gods give birth. Like heaven, it cannot be touched. It gives birth to kings who fasten the lasting diadem. It gives birth to the high priest who put crown to head. Your Lord, the honored Lord, sits with King On the dais of On. The Anuna gods, the great gods, have taken up dwelling in your midst. Consume their food in your Jaiguna, among your rare trees. House, Sumer, have your many stilts built. Have your cows multiply. Have your many sheepfolds set up. Have your sheep be many. Have your Jaiguna reach the sky. Have your lasting shrine lift hand to heaven. Next, he visits and blesses the cities of Nippur, the place where the gods are born, Ur, Maluha in the Indus Valley, Magan, Elam Mahashi, Martu, Dilmun, bestowing upon them gifts such as abundant crops, flocks, precious metals, and success in war. Then he lends power to the sea, rivers, clouds, and rain, turning the barren hills into fields and lending extra power to the rivers Tigris and Euphrates by filling their beds with a stream of his own semen. Enki also makes the sheep, cattle, and crops multiply and establishes the skills of building and weaving. As each specific domain is named, Enki appoints a god or goddess to supervise it. Now, it is frequently overlooked in the analysis of this myth that Enki assigns tasks for the gods and goddesses of the land which were already within their domain of expertise. In other words, a closer examination will prove that all deities quoted perform their functions already previous to Enki's managerial designs for them. Nevertheless, by formally setting up specific tasks and domains for gods and goddesses in the organization of Sumer, Enki establishes a harmonic whole, and it is this harmonious whole that Enki is in charge of overseeing and empowered to do so by Enlil, the air god, for the delight of kings and princes of the land for the common good. In their control of cities, goddesses and gods play equivalent roles. The god of the city could be either male or female. In most cases, this deity also had a spouse who was less important to the well-being of the city than the deity itself. It was not always the male partner who was the major god. Either configuration was possible. The goddess could be the major deity, with her male spouse less significant than she. The male god could be chief deity with a wife secondary to him. Enki's strengths are in terms of organization, control, and the promotion of life, and to that goal of intelligence and technical and practical success in the supreme interest of the divine and human society. So, This is the true nature of Enki's power: strength in proportion, planning, strategy, and harmonization of powers. For all these reasons, Enki in this narrative is chosen to be the patron of all the gods and goddesses of Sumer because of his dynamism, insight, and his leadership qualities exercised by empowerment. The third and final part of the narrative is damaged, but basically consists of Inanna's complaint that she did not receive any specific office in the running of the universe, while 5 goddesses did receive worthy functions: Aruru, Ninisina, Ninmug, Ninsaba, and Nanchi. Only the first half of Enki's reply is preserved, but it seems that he states clearly that, after all, Inanna does stand for a number of properties or competences, especially those belonging to war and strife. Because the very end of the composition is missing, we do not know the full extent of Enki's reply to Inanna. As damaged and broken as the text of Enki's response to Inanna is, the text is what we got, and we should try and understand its deeper meaning. Inanna's words and tearful behavior towards her authority shows that Inanna had not come into her full powers as yet. Me, the woman, why did you treat in a different way? I, the holy Inanna, where are my functions? Enki answers his daughter, the holy Inanna. What did I keep from you? And then, what did I keep from you? What more could we add to you? Young Inanna, what did I keep from you? What more could we add to you? Let's examine the evolution of the image of Inanna. Previous to the writings of the Enheduanna, the high priestess, royal princess, and daughter of Sargon of Akkad, Inanna's cult was not that widespread. The image of the goddess and a figure of strength is one of the striking features of the poetry of Enheduanna, the first known author in world literature. Therefore, previous to 3200 BCE, Inanna's image had not yet fully matured in the minds and soul history of Sumer. However, she had some of her powers already centered on love and war, which were acknowledged by Enki. We have mentioned in our historical evidence that the origin of Enki and the world order may be well older than 3000 BCE as part of the previous oral tradition. But even by 3000 BCE, the figure of Inanna was still of a young, immature goddess who had yet to conquer the sacred measures from Enki, as stated in the narrative known as Inanna and Enki, the god of wisdom. In this story, a further development surely from Enki and the world order, Inanna conquers the sacred measures, or me, from Enki, and take them back with her to Uruk. Far from being defeated, Enki at the end of this myth declares Eridu and Uruk allies and friends, great in power unto themselves. Therefore, it seems to be logical to suppose that the narrative known as Enki and the World Order belongs to an earlier phase when the young goddess Inanna had not yet conquered the sacred measures, or me, from Enki. This assumption can be substantiated because the figure of Inanna raises in strength and power with the coming of the Uruk period, the creation of writing, and is definitely grounded by the writings of Enheduanna, which come much after the Eridu period. Finally, most academics usually concentrate on Inanna's polar qualities of strife and war, for example, not mentioning that Enki himself referred to her as the goddess who makes kings and whose allure is unmatched. Inanna, after all, is the joy of Sumer and the delight of kings and humankind, a fact that is often totally ignored by academics who attempt to analyze this quote-unquote myth. It is important to point out that Enki always appears as the ally and friend of Inanna in many texts, so it would be illogical to suppose a radical change of mind on his side towards the young goddess on the make. It would therefore be expected that once the negative aspects of the goddess are mentioned, the positive would also follow as a natural sequence in the narrative. This point is never raised in extant analyses of this story. Enki helped to bring Inanna from the underworld to the land of the living in the descent of Inanna, and healed the goddess who had been raped in Inanna and Shukalet Uda, bestowing upon her the sacred measures in the myth Inanna and Enki. There is no reason to believe his response to the young goddess in Enki and the World Order would be totally negative, as implied in the modern academic analyses of this narrative up till now. Based on our analysis, we can say that Enki's intention for the organization of the world consists firstly of setting up the bonds between Sumer, its cities and neighboring regions, so that they all work together for the common good, especially because of its importance as the main port, together with its trading partners. Second, there is a strong administrative element in Enki's organized world because several areas and/or activities are entrusted to the responsibilities of gods and goddesses. In this fashion, production and results can be regulated with the ultimate goal of creating the conditions in which wealth can be brought to the land as a whole. Third, it can be said that Enki's achievement is not so much in the material goods themselves produced, for these goods were already in existence by the gods and goddesses. What is unique, though, is the way Enki establishes the pattern whereupon all gods work together in harmony, with Enki in charge of overseeing results. Summing up, it is rare among world creation narratives to find one told from the standpoint of an ensemble. Normally, the pattern is the world being created by one or two mighty deities either out of nothing or chaos. The highlights of Enki and the World Order are creation from concerted efforts, joint work, empowerment, and partnership, as well as the other cities and neighboring lands for the success of Enki's program. Furthermore, it is expressly said that Enki acts at the behest of the great gods. There is no hint of a feeling of inferiority on Enki's part. His self-praise is already enough to refute this idea. The final aspect embedded in this narrative is Enki's love and care for humankind. Enki and the World Order is a living legacy of the conditions for the good life on Earth, which is taken to be identical to the idolized Sumerian way of public life. These conditions consist of a well-ordered organization, of the fixation and demarcation of responsibilities for the common good, and are still today an example to be followed to the letter. Life is no more or no less than the fruit of the efforts we put in to make it be. This is the way of Sumer, the ways of Enki first, and then Inanna's.